All right, well, welcome to the Public Transportation Subcommittee meeting. The focus of today's agenda is on purchasing a new vehicle for the fleet, and then if we have time left over, we might address some other topics. Maybe I'll give like a basic summary, and then we can kind of jump into some key questions. So everybody should have a sheet with the sort of breaks down the current fleet and the vehicles. So the C11 is out of service. We have a replacement vehicle ordered. I guess it's like in production right now, and they're saying that we should check back in August. Hopefully the bus is complete in around October, in which case it would be on the road in November. So that's sort of in process. We'll see if hopefully there's not any delays, but we'll see. So then it's sort of time for us to start thinking about the replacement for C11, or no, yeah, is it C11 that we're trying to replace?
So that's the one that is.
All right. C3 is what the one we need to replace. So it had 145,000 miles as these mileage are as of January. So we have another quarter sort of.
Yeah, it's 156 as of today, 156,632.
Okay, 156. So we know that sort of but we kind of need to buy a new bus almost every year in order to sort of keep the fleet rotated. We got behind because we weren't able to purchase new buses during sort of the height of the pandemic. So we know that we need to purchase at least one bus per year to sort of catch back up on sort of not purchasing any buses for the next couple of years. So C3 is the next one. And also because of the long term it takes to sort of get approval from both DOT and then the supply chain of actually ordering a bus and getting it here, is that it also could take easily a year from the time that we make a decision to the bus getting here, if not 2 years. So it's pretty important that we sort of make these decisions well ahead of time and sort of get these things in the queue. So I think the key options that we sort of looked at with Marissa was that whether or not we wanted a Lot I bus, which was 20 passengers at 192,000, or a Lot J bus, which was 24 passengers at 213,000. And there may be some other key differences, but that sort of was like the biggest number was sort of, do we need a 24-person bus or a 20-person bus?
Yeah. So the Lot J bus is what we just purchased to replace C11. It's basically the biggest bus size that we typically purchase, which made sense doing so for C11, as that was also the biggest bus that we had in our inventory currently. So right now, I tried to price this out. These aren't direct quotes, but when I got that 192,000 and 213,000, what I did is I took the base cost associated with the state contracts, looked at the add-ons or non-contract options that we typically purchase, and then just did the math associated with that. So by no means this is a formal quote, but this is to give us an estimate as to what we're probably looking at. Yes, the Lot J bus is a little bit bigger than what, C3 technically is now, but is that maybe the smartest move considering some of the avenues that we're taking in hopefully increasing our ridership, or, it's up for you guys to decide if a Lot I bus would be better in terms of saving the cost. Do we need a bigger bus? Things like that. So I just wanted to give you guys the price out, note some of the differences. The Lot I bus, we would also have to upgrade the engine associated with it, which is a lot of what that 192,000 cost is. To make it a diesel would cost us about $15,000, whereas the Lot J bus already has that cost, included within the base vehicle is a diesel engine. So those are kind of the big differences between the two options that we currently have.
And what are we doing mostly with the C3 bus? What does that bus do?
The C3 and C4, or they're Albany buses usually. Right now they're going to Albany. It usually, to have the bigger buses, works better on the Albany runs because they vary. You can't, definitely on one Albany run, you always have to have a bigger bus. Problem is, depends on the second Albany run, depending on days, depending on holidays, depending on, you can't always mix it up because sometimes the state workers, they have a day off or there's going to be a transition. So then the one run, the earlier run, may catch the heavier coming home, as normally would be the later run. So if you have a smaller bus going up and you don't have that day figured out just right, you may have troubles. It's a crapshoot. Where if you have the bigger bus always on the runs, you don't run into that. You usually always have enough room.
It's more comfortable.
Correct.
You say bigger, you're smaller, you're talking about the 2024.
The 24 passenger. The 24 passenger for those two runs, then you don't have we very rarely ever have an issue of we don't have enough room. I try to swap it out because we're shorter bus. We've been shorter bus, so I'll try to rotate them and put C5. C5 is the only small bus we have right now, and I'll try to run that like on the second run for Albany or something like that because we can get away with it to put some more mileage on it. Works fine. If it works fine, if it's a good day. We have had a couple opportunities. There has been a day or two that we've gotten up there. We've had to say no to somebody getting on. I don't want to do that. And to me, the state workers take precedent. So the ones that ride every day with the tickets, and we've had to have somebody run up and say, "I'm sorry, we're full. We can't get you on." So that hasn't happened very often, but it has happened.
Because people can't stand in the aisles. That's like against code.
You can, but the problem that we're running into now, there's two things. It's a liability question because the insurance company, even though it is legal, the insurance companies are fighting that issue. One. Number two, because you don't have stand guards. CDTA has stand guards.
Right.
But to compare this bus with a CDTA bus, you're talking $150,000 more.
Yeah.
And so with the stand guards in them, that's where the insurance company plays next. So I'm kind of like, I push against it. It's one thing if you're going from Walmart down to the next store, you can probably get away for it. But go to Albany to Hudson, I deter it very much.
Right. Because if there's not something to hold on to, it makes sense.
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. Yeah, I would really.
And is there much fuel economy difference between a 20 and 24 passenger bus as far as?
Not really enough to matter in that aspect. And of course, the fuel economy actually goes on the contractor. Doesn't have anything to do with the county per se. It is something that we look at, but it's not that much difference.
Running a bigger bus so it's for fuel mileage.
Correct.
The smartest thing to do is.
Correct. From a county standpoint, the bigger bus, hopefully, if the numbers go up for ridership, you give a few more dollars for the ridership. When you're talking, in my opinion, the other routes in town, going to Germantown, going around the county, the smaller bus works fine. Works fine. Usually the Hudson shuttles, the small bus works fine, but there you have to plan for certain days of the month. First part of the month, first week of the month, you got to have the bigger bus because Social Security checks come out. You have to know seniors, when they shop, it gets to when you do it long enough, you know when you have to have the bigger bus. It's just experience, I guess. The drivers know. We'll even swap a bus. One of the mechanics swap a bus, and drivers say, "I can't have it tomorrow. I got to have the big bus." So the drivers basically run the routes now, and they tell us what to do. So it works that way. So when you have 5 buses, the 5th bus usually is a big bus. Then we're fine. Since we haven't had a 5th bus for so long, it's a little challenge.
Marissa, do you have an ETA? And if we order either one of these buses,
The turnaround was about the same no matter which we purchased for, but I just ended up looking at least.
I know you gave us dates of the ones that we've ordered now are out there,
Yeah.
but how long would it take if we run this through the channels and order it? When are we looking at a delivery date of it?
So what makes that unpredictable is that the state has to approve everything first. So that's going to take the longest amount of time. Once they approve it, we're looking at least a year for the turnaround from that. But to be completely honest with you, to get the state to approve this on top of that year, I mean, it took me over a year last time.
Yep.
So I would hope that it would go smoother this time. Honestly, I don't think that it will though. So it would not surprise me to say that this would take almost.
We got a lot of pushback from DOT on replacing a bus
Yeah,
that needed $20-some thousand of repairs
Right.
and 180,000 miles. This one's running and has less miles.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's gonna be an
But,
issue.
yeah.
Well, I've never seen them approve one quickly. I don't.
Yeah.
think.
And
You know,
this has
Been going
constantly
on for
always
years.
been the problem. And I remember when going back when I was first here, and I've said this to some people before, when I had to come in, when I was asked to come in and fill in when Ken was out and no one was here to do the audit for the state feds, and they came down, so I came in so someone could represent the county. And I had a long-term conversation with him, and I just said, of course, it was me. You could say, well, Mike Johnson said it. Well, at that point in time, you could say, who's he? So I said what I wanted to say, and I said it's very unfair for the state and the feds to hold Little Columbia County for a small program on the same terms as you would hold Albany County with such a large program with the financial situation that they have compared to this.
Yeah.
They're putting that same thing up against CDTA, which runs, they buy a bus number one that's $400,000 or $500,000, which can go 500,000 miles.
Yeah, they want 10 years for 350,000 miles.
Correct.
Buses.
This is not the same. This is not the same vehicle.
Yeah, and we asked about it too, and they were like, well, that's just basically the contract. Like, that's just what it is.
That's right, and that's very unfair because you're comparing apples to oranges.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that the county, even prior to myself being in, it's always been that scenario. It's always been that argument.
Yeah.
You know, and when we first took this over, the county had some very poor shaped buses that had a lot of miles, and they put the first engine job. We walked into this in 6 months and put $15,000 or $18,000 into a bus that wasn't worth $15,000. The body wasn't worth $15,000 on it. It was a shame. I mean, I was in tears trying to put it. It was just a waste of money.
And I don't even know if we ever got back even all of the reimbursement on the engine for some of that. I think that's like what some of the outstanding.
That was kind of like when you first came
Yeah.
on.
Oh,
Marissa,
you
remember that? Remember that? That was, and I kept arguing the point, we're not getting our money back.
Yeah.
The county's not getting the money back for putting this. That's why, at this point in time, that's why if you look, we bought 3 buses that were 2019s, and we pushed and pushed. The reason we were able to accomplish that, C5, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, was accomplished because we bought it with county funds.
Right, yeah, so that
Off the
wasn't-
lot
yeah.
from Don Brown's, and that's why we were so successful.
That bridged us to that.
Right, so if you take, and we've had this discussion before, what we did was we brought these numbers up to new equipment, which if we went back and look at the savings that the county has had in comparison in the past 3 or 4 years on maintenance,
Right.
overwhelmingly
Yeah.
had to prove our point. So that's why it worked. We felt confident at what we wanted to get to. It took some time to get to it. We had to spend some money up front, but at the tail end, we really saved a lot of money. And then COVID hit, and then all of these
kind of
walls
lost
came up
momentum,
in
yeah.
front of us where we couldn't get over. It was no one's fault. It just, everything came at once, and we couldn't keep
Well,
the
they
system going.
froze the purchasing program
Correct.
for 2 years.
Correct.
So let's assume that it'll take us 6 months to a year for DOT approval, and we kind of know what we're getting into, so we can go in a little more intentional, and then another year for delivery. So we're looking at 1.5 to 2 years from whenever we get this in motion, which I think should be soon. So we're still looking at somewhere between the end of 2024 and the middle of 2025, which seems like a long time, right? I guess based on what you're saying, I think it makes sense to go with the larger bus. I mean, it's 10% more expensive, but it's also 10% larger. And if we need it for the ridership, it makes sense.
Everything is bigger.
Right.
Transmission's bigger, engine's bigger, rear end's bigger, bearings are bigger. It's a heavier bus. It takes the beating better.
So it'll potentially last longer or resell better.
Yes, the resale is not that big of a deal on it because every county's in the same thing. If you look, you watch Auctions International or whatever, they're in the same boat. When they get to 200,000 miles, they're not bringing a lot of money because nobody wants them. You can't use them. Who's going to use them? My concern is this. Mileages that we're here, if you will write these down, these are the true mileages on these sheets today. So C3 is 156,632. C4 is 126,171.
Say it slower.
Yeah. C3 is 156,632.
Mhm.
C4 is 126,171. C5 is 125,640. C6 is 96,849. Now, my concern, of course, is C3, I believe, is the one, I don't have that in front of me. Do you know if C3 was the one we just did all the engine work on?
I think it was, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was.
That was
Don't quote me either. I can look when I look at the
That was the
office.
tune of almost $10,000.
Yeah, it was a
So
good
we
one.
just spent $10,000 in that range, and that was after we really did some arm twisting and some phone calls, because Ford wanted over 15 grand to just do some engine repair.
Yeah.
Because the warranties have gone out on all of these vehicles. We have no warranties on them. So the engine repair work on that was not a complete engine job. That was just a top end engine repair that had to be done. My concern next, Marissa and I have talked about, is C4. I've gotten an estimate for doing a maintenance repair on it, to a preventive maintenance repair. That's going to be $4,000, so that we don't have to spend, before we have to spend $10,000 on the same bus on C4
Mhm.
that we just did on C3. So now we're looking at $4,000 there. I would anticipate spending soon, so that we save $6,000. Down the road, we'll be looking at that again on another one of these. C6, the headliner is coming apart in it, which again is out of warranty. We have an estimate from Don Brown's, almost $3,000 to replace that. We have one estimate of $5,000 to replace it. So the cheapest we have now is $3,000 for Don Brown's. That we'll have to finish an estimate of to get that accomplished. I've got $8,000 worth of repairs that that we're going to be looking for on these right now that I even know of.
Right.
Okay. It's time for C4 and C5 to do what we do after 110,000 miles. We go through them and we put all new wheel bearings in. We put all fluids changed, all overhaul. Usually runs around $2,000. We've done it in the past. It seems to be very good preventive maintenance. All the transmission filters are changed, everything. I've done it before. Seems like good money to do that. So you're going to add $2,000 to those two buses.
Mhm.
Next year, we would anticipate doing the same thing with C6. You're up to $12,000, $13,000 that I can anticipate we're going to spend on this now, coming up in this summer. From now for the next 4 months, I would anticipate that kind of money going into these right here, providing nothing else breaks down.
Mhm.
My point being is, now we're going to start seeing bills, I think. From the experience, I feel like I'm getting back into when we were 5 years ago.
Right back to where we.
Right back to where we were.
Marissa, just from my own education standpoint, does the state require that these buses have so many miles on it before you can even start the process?
Yeah.
They have guidelines.
Yeah.
For the type, whatever lot it is, they have guidelines. Like I said, for what we buy, they want 10 years old and 350,000 miles before they'll approve replacement. Now, it was arm twisting and Supervisor Schmiedes helped us get it approved with some
Yeah.
pressure on them for the one. And I had 182,000 and it wasn't running and it needed at least 20,000 in repairs.
Correct.
So yeah, so on paper, our vehicles will never
They'll never
make
make
it.
it.
They will never get enough miles on them to actually get them approved. So we have to enter this like negotiation period, which is why it takes 6 months to a year to sort of eventually, like, just to sort of get them to make an exception. But every time we purchase a bus, it's an exception. So it's, even if we have grant money set aside for us to spend it on this purpose,
Yep.
we have to get an exception to use it for this purpose. So
Unless you buy a bus like CDTA, which is going to be $350,000, which to me is ridiculous.
The only reason why I asked that
Yeah.
is obviously the state is not in tune with what's actually
Correct.
happening in the marketplace.
Absolutely.
And there needs to be some push to say, hey,
Yeah,
and I know in emergency services, okay, because of this lead in the marketplace, we're ordering ambulances way ahead of time because we know it's a 2-year
Yes.
delivery time.
Yes.
I don't see why this, and I understand it's the state, but somehow there needs to be some sort of push
Yeah.
to
And
say,
I
hey,
mean,
you know, because we're gonna end up just like we were years ago, just
Yeah.
what you said.
Yeah.
We're gonna be in a pickle.
We're gonna be in
down to
trouble.
3
We're
buses.
gonna be in trouble.
yeah, and the correspondence, like trying to get the last one, it like becomes this thing where you're like just on them. You're giving them cost analysis. You're breaking down all of, like I had to send in reports of everything that we've done. Like you're just jumping through hoop after hoop after hoop to get these things done to prove that point because we're saying it, they want us to back it up. But you can't even get a response from them in a timely fashion once you give them that documentation. So then it ends up being like me reaching out to supervisor committees like, hey, I need your assistance because they're not doing this. And then we have to go to all of these sources just to get anything done. And they don't really care how many times I email them or what documentation I give them. It's just not really getting through. And then you add on top of that, like how many reps we've gone through in the last
Yeah,
year.
there's lots
So
of them
every
there,
single time you do it, you're having to catch that new person up on all of this too, which then takes time.
And as Mike says, this was happening 12 years ago too.
Yeah.
You
It's
know.
an absolute nightmare.
Plus, we have the additional, we have 3 buses that we bought at the same time, so we have 3 that are gonna break.
Right, that's the bad part of doing
Yeah, and we,
that.
and we had that discussion then, but
Yeah.
we were in worse shape then. So we knew it would, but then again, we didn't think COVID was gonna hit. We didn't think all this walls were
We
gonna
didn't
come up.
predict COVID.
We had some thoughts about that. We won't go down. That's a different
Well,
discussion.
and then even, our reporting from there, having someone from the state work with us to get our reporting done correctly. And then you find out a year and a half later, oh, that wasn't it done the way they wanted it done. So then you have to backtrack all of those things too. So it's just been a constant battle, from one.
But
end to the other.
theoretically, we have money earmarked for the next bus, so, you know, in the state size. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think we have to increase it.
We have, in this year's budget, we have 190 budgeted for the bus.
So
And about 20% of that would be county funds, I think the rest would be.
But that's budgeted on the idea that they are ready to fund us another 190 or 100, whatever the 80% of 190 is, right?
Now, not to throw a monkey wrench in it, but let me throw you another issue here. And what you said, I agree with, but there's another point. In the marketplace, and believe me, I've had this problem. You have the other issue of what you're trying to do is boggled down because of the electric bus issue. And the developers, the contractors, the builders are not putting much effort into building because the electric bus is overwhelming all of the buildings. The electric bus scenario, whether it be school bus, whether it be coach bus, whether it be CDTA type shuttle bus, is coming top priority because that's where the money is. That's where the federal funds are coming. That's where everything is the icing on the cake. So these type buses, which you're trying to do, which are going, especially in New York, going to be outdated, are not, there's not a push on to build them. This is another reason why it's taken that long to get. So you have the other issue of you've got to start talking about electric buses. You have to have this conversation. Now, that is a whole nother animal. That is a whole nother concept. The electric bus scenario, of course, I believe there's a ton of money out there. I think personally, it should be handled coincide with this. And it should be going down if you're going to go down that. And I'm not saying it's how can I say this right? The information I'm trying to get to the table, I'm not saying I'm supporting it or not supporting it, but the information needs to be looked at. The electric bus scenario, which is also required a 2-part form. You have the bus, the program of the bus, and you have the program of the infrastructure, which is a 2-part program. It's funding is two parts on this. It's a separate entity. They both have to be looked at together in a two-part way. If you're going to go after this, you need to go after this now and go after this big and get big money. You may be able to replace a lot of this with electric. If you get the financing, you've got to get your, in my opinion, you've got to get your state and federal people involved to go after this. But meanwhile, you've got to still go down this path because you're committed to this bus you've already purchased. You possibly could get another one in the meantime, but the next step would probably be electric
Yeah,
because you're not going to get one.
The contract, they just added one electric bus. I don't know if it was full electric or if it was, I don't have it in front of me. But that's a new addition to the New York State contract, was that they did add one with like a wild turnaround time and things like that. And I don't think it was in like the size that we would need. I would hope that at some point they would add more, but I did see the addition of one on our state contract
So
option.
this is all coming,
Yeah.
and this is all the new avenue that you've
Has
got
there
to
been
be
a
aware of.
mandate? I know school buses have to go by a certain date. Is there been a date?
35.
I think 2035, but I understand also that may be bumped up to 27. Again, I don't know that for sure, but someone really needs to be on top of that, so you don't get caught.
I mean, my sense is that, I guess what I'm hearing you saying too is that like we should, we have the one bus on order. I think all these things are going to take a long turnaround. We should put this next bus,
Yes.
like, fuel vehicle or diesel vehicle on order.
Yep.
And then thinking about like, yeah, maybe we do one more fuel bus and then, but
There-
like it probably is going to take us like 5 years, right, to make that transition.
Third scenario is path that we've taken before. Can we do possibility of fronting the money like we've done before and go after the reimbursement in the future? Because there are possibilities out there as the funding does not exist with some counties, some municipalities where there's a bus sitting. And the county can purchase that bus.
Yeah. So the question is like, we're not sure if DOT would reimburse that. I mean, right, we could float the funds.
I've gone down that path before.
It's just a question of how confident we are that DOT would eventually reimburse.
Were
it.
you reimbursed when the county did that? Did you finalize that? Such as C5, were you ever reimbursed for C5?
I don't think that
We bought that slightly used.
Yeah.
No, we bought it on lot,
It was on the lot.
had the funds.
There was some, I'd have to go back and.
Yeah.
Before my time, so
I
I
think
don't
it's around 190.
I think we budgeted that.
No, I think that was less.
It was all county
That
dollars.
was less. That was under 100. That was under 100 because I went up and got it. It was under 100,000.
Is that from
Yeah, it
Brown?
was just-
Browns, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, that size vehicle, you could probably do that again. Now, and this is and again, I'm thinking outside the box too. Along the same terms, if you can get a conversation with the state to push just what we had this discussion to, just like PJ's saying, this program doesn't fit us.
Yeah.
But however, there's another avenue. If we can get the state to relinquish this and release some of these vehicles, such as C5, if you get C5 with 150,000 miles on it yet, and because we're taking good care of it and the body is shaped, and you can get that out of this program, you could take that vehicle and turn it over to another program within the county as a backup. It could be a backup for the veterans. It could be a backup for healthcare consortium. It could be a spare vehicle once it's out of this program and turned over to the county for another use. 150,000 miles, as long as it's in good shape, you could get another year, 2 or 3 out of it for very, very little money. So there's a lot of looking at here. You just don't take it out in that case and put it up behind the county highway for 2 years and then sell it. You might be able to get some more use out of it.
Well, let's have that conversation with DOT and see what kind of flexibility we would have about purchasing outside the contract.
Yeah, so I know for a fact we still have to do all of the cost analysis. I still have to go through the entire purchasing. So it would likely be exactly the same process.
Mhm.
It's just a different method of purchase. So I would expect it to take exactly
Right,
as
Mike,
long,
you're right.
except I wouldn't have it to go over a year, but would that bus even still be available by the time I got it? The state to approve it? Probably not. So we would have, it would not, I don't know how I would get that to work
Okay.
unless we got them to retire the bus first. Truthfully, I don't see the point in me saying, hey, this is
Right.
available, I want to purchase it without first getting them to approve us retiring anything. So I think that's the fight first. Because otherwise, I'm just going to be saying,
Sure.
let's go through this purchase method, and then the bus isn't going to be there by the time I wait 6 months to a year for that approval anyway.
And,
So-
and if you can't explain that to them to come up with a plan, you're treading water. You're never gonna get ahead. You're never
Yeah.
gonna have us where the program works so that you're never in this predicament. Just can't get ahead.
So I would think the conversation that we would need to initiate with the state isn't then to retire one bus, but hey, how can we expedite the retirement of buses, period? And then see how we can go about that. Because if we want to go that route of purchasing off law or something like that, we need to already kind of have the layout done to retire to. And I don't know that that is.
So I have one more, and I'll stop after this. Add one more fourth thing. What if, and I understand, I've been told, but I understand reading the paper. What if you were to say to the state that you were contemplating expanding your system and need another bus?
Yeah, so they would need to see the plan and everything associated with it. So,
That's-
yeah, so with like Pro Park and our expansion of the shopping shuttle, the way we got approved for that altogether is that we had to have the schedule. We had to give them everything up front. So before I could go to them and say that, we would need to know exactly how we're expanding it, the times, the schedule, the fares associated with it. We'd probably have to do a survey throughout the area. So we would need to do a lot of the back work first. So
The reason I say that is I know I read that they're contemplating the issue of possibly doing something in New Lebanon.
mhm,
So if you had something like that with a tag on to something else where it required you, well, we need another bus
Yeah.
to do that type of program. We have this one coming in as the fifth bus. We need a sixth bus. It's another way to
Yeah.
get another bus.
no, I agree. We would have to do, my opinion with the state is that we would have to do all the back work
Right.
first. So get the schedule completely mapped out, the route
Yep.
completely mapped out, all of those things.
Find the riders.
Even
Yeah,
have
no, I get
like,
it. Right, exactly.
you know, who is it, who would be the provider? How would that mix in with timelines of like current contracts, things like that too? All of that would need to be upfront, I think, before we went to the state with it, or else I would just be scrambling to find those things in a fashion that we wouldn't have it.
Right.
Yeah.
So like even with the shopping shuttle extension, which was using the exact same route,
Sure.
and we had a lot of evidence for doing it, and we weren't purchasing a
Sure,
bus.
sure.
Even when we had awarded the RFP and our contacts at DOT approved the RFP, the like other side of the house at DOT, like that process took months.
And it was an emergency.
Yeah,
and
like-
it took months.
That's-
So, yeah, like that didn't even.
So yeah, all these things take
Oh.
And
it's-
even-
all these
I know.
things. So it's, in some ways, it's
Mistake.
like we need to start putting things in motion that we expect to happen a year or two from now. We kind of
Yeah.
like need to put in motion now. So those are the advantages of planning ahead, is to like build in
Yeah.
like 6 months or a year of churn with DOT.
Yes, I think that if we had all of those things, if we presented it to the state, that would eventually get us
Yep.
additional buses.
Yep.
It's just,
Yep.
we would need to do all of it
Right,
before.
right.
And
The reason I bring this up is, again, and I don't have the answer to this, but listening to what you said, Ulster County, from what I know of their program, has way too many buses.
Yeah.
For the program. They have buses running over all over Creation, with no riders.
how?
But I don't have that question.
A lot of money.
Why do they have so many buses going all over the 1 or 2 lanes? They're running up Greene County, they're running up, and they use Ulster ARC, and they've got tons of buses, the smaller buses, and they're running 3 trips up the mountain to Tannersville a day. They're running all over creation for a couple of days.
With no riders.
So why? How? Where's the money coming from? Where's the buses coming from? This is my question. And again, I don't know the answers, so maybe there's answers to that question.
Most counties
It could
self-funded.
be.
Right,
yeah,
that's
you
the
know.
only thing that I can imagine is that they're self-funding that.
Reach out to Ulster County and ask.
Would just be, I would just be, I would, it's curious. It's just curious. I know what we do, and we, I think collectively, watch everything we do. We justify everything we do. We try to, we talk to one another. That's why this committee was formed, so that we know what we're doing, and we can, if there's ever a question from the public, you want to be able to answer that. How is a smaller county double the service that we're doing with less riders? I think. Again, I don't know that answer, so I may be.
Yeah, I don't know.
This may-
I don't know the
I
Ulster
may
County.
not.
I
This
don't know
may
Ulster
not be a
County
legitimate
stats. So
question. so-
Unless they're all synced, like all of their transportation things are somehow synced, so then when they file for grants and things like that, they have more ability to use it wider.
And is
I
that
mean,
the
that's the
question?
only
Is that,
other
is
thing
it a
that I
grant
can-
process? Is there something we're missing out on? Or
I
should we,
don't know.
should we
enough
go
about
after
that.
something?
I think we are missing out on funding. I mean, I think my sense is that once you expand your service, it's always a struggle to maintain it, but it's like, I think there are opportunities for us to have more routes or have more buses. And overall, we get a pretty large amount of state and federal funding compared to how much the county spends. But I think the challenge is that, like, if we had a more ambitious transportation plan that we submitted, it might take us years to build up. Like, the thing is, we can't do it instantly, but we could get a lot more state and federal funding for a more ambitious plan if we put everything in place and sort of plot along to get there. So I think there are opportunities to get more funding.
Which I can understand. I would hate to spend county or resources and not have the ridership. I'm cheap. So I don't want to spend somebody's money with not.
They have
Justify
a
it.
year 2045 long-range transportation plan that they update every 5 years. So that's probably the start of it.
Yeah.
Of how they, and they have a council, transportation council.
I was just gonna ask, are they a transportation?
But also, I think probably though too, that's why they use Ulster ARC. So they're getting Ulster money, they're getting Greene County money. They're getting more revenue. That's probably number one from more than one purpose. So they're multitasking there.
Yeah, and
which
they're
I-
put more into it up front to be able
Yeah, I don't
to.
know that question. These are all just questions. Maybe we're missing something. Maybe there's something we're missing there.
I think
Yeah.
the question is, how can the state fund a transportation system with no ridership?
Well, I would just,
Right around the circles.
we don't know if there's no ridership, right?
Well, I'm just basing it on.
I don't know. I mean, and this isn't me. I mean, when the state inspectors, I'm having these conversations with state inspectors, inspect the buses, and they're saying, I don't understand how these buses are going up. I'm following buses up and down with Tannersville and whatever. They have one person on it.
Or just a state function based off of surveys,
Right.
your projections from early on, and look less at what's happening in the
Real world, right.
immediate.
Actual
Like, I don't
exactly,
know.
Exactly.
I don't
No,
know that
no.
I would be surprised to see that if they don't necessarily look at the current data once they have everything in motion. Now that
Sure.
might catch up at a
Sure.
certain point.
Sure.
But I don't know with a plan that's so far out if that's part of why they're getting that.
Okay, well, just to close up on the most urgent issue, I guess what I'm hearing is that we want to move forward with the purchase of the larger Lot J 24 passenger bus.
Okay, so what I will do is I will get a quote from the awarded contractor. I will initially include all of the additions or add-ons that we purchased in the past. And then I can send that quote to you guys at that point if we want to decide yes, all of these are necessary. No, all of these aren't necessary. If it's going to Albany, do we need a bike rack? Do we need whatever? So I'll start by initiating a conversation with the vendor and getting a solid, true quote as opposed to just what I have here. And then I can push that out to all of you with the options. They're all outlined what is mandatory per our funding requirements versus what is optional.
And Marcia, from my perspective, I don't know what Jim thinks, but I just see this going the way that other state reimbursements go, whereby Columbia County has to upfront the money, okay?
Always,
And then try to get reimbursed, okay?
Yeah.
Can you find out what the, the rules are on that and what it is? Because otherwise, we're gonna be in the same boat, like I talked about earlier, and what you said, okay?
Yeah.
That we need to somehow possibly incorporate this into our budget,
Yeah.
all right, to upfront the money to get these things started somehow, some point. Otherwise, you're gonna be looking at another, we've been there, 2 or 3 buses out of service.
Yeah.
And we can't afford that for the community.
I think PJ, and I think you guys are the ones that can answer this question. The people who have been here long term, go back 5, 6, 7 years. What kind of phone calls did you receive 6 or 7, 8 years ago? How many phone calls did you receive at the office? Where's the bus? It's bus broke down. What's going on? The bus is on I-90. No heat. There's no air conditioning, whatever. I remember those conversations. I couldn't give you answers.
Right, in 2018, we had buses that didn't have heat.
No heat.
It's like, that's really unacceptable. So hopefully.
That's how I would gauge the system. What type of phone calls are you getting today that you didn't get, that you got last year, those years that you don't get today or whatever? That kind of gauges the system, really. If you're not getting those types of calls, that's why.
Look, that's why we made an emergency call by purchasing a bus from county monies.
Right.
At that point, you found one available. We made the
Sure.
call and it got supported by the full board and that was a godsend. We really needed that bus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing's gonna happen here. You can see it, handwriting on the wall.
I do recommend too that we do try and get ahead of this, as PJ and Mike talk about getting behind. I think that we should spend some time getting ahead of this before the 2035 date of looking at EV buses and getting into EV. Is a broader thing. The county does need to do a bunch of work. We have talked about EV fleet vehicles, and I know our task force is going to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors soon to review our policy and look at future vehicles being converted to EV. First, we need to talk about infrastructure. Ray Jerkowski and I have been meeting with National Grid, and National Grid can work with us and help develop an infrastructure plan, because they would like to know, where do we keep all of our fleet vehicles now and where are they going to have to start looking at? Because it's going to take us 5 years to think about that. It's going to take them another 5 years to build any of that stuff. So these things are happening and we have to pay attention. I think that there's certainly some value in making the plan. The National Grid plan that they can help us execute is, from what I understand, when you talk to any of these funding streams, you need to have that plan in place in order to go after any of this federal money that you hear being offered. But if we don't have a plan for where we would, use fleet vehicles,
Right.
And, the busing gets to be a real challenge in my mind. I mean, the county always knows, okay, we've got some fleet vehicles at, 325 or DSS, and maybe a certain portion of those can be EV in the future or hybrids or something. So we want some, level 2 chargers for that.
Sure.
Our bus service, as Mike knows, is contracted to Mike. So, we're going to ask him to make millions and millions of dollars of investment into a program that we may then bid to some other bus service next year, because of the bidding process. So I don't know how the state wants us to handle some of that going forward, but we do need to start looking at all of it. So,
Yeah, so I mean, if we were gonna, I guess, how much does it make sense to include public transit as part of that county fleet planning, or is it really a separate is it like a separate thing?
I'd like to I think National Grid would like to know, I mean, what I'm hearing from them is they would like to know for their planning purposes, where might you in the future build out and want these services? To that effect, even for us to have several, level 2 chargers is no challenge to them. I mean, I assume Mike would need, 50 level 3 chargers over there. You're going to use more electricity than an entire village of Beaumont does today. So how does that happen? I mean, I don't know, but
Maybe I'll be on a beach renting sailboats. I don't know.
I think somebody's going to, in the busing situation, you and I talked the other day, I think that hydrogen is going to become a thing, you may see something like that come into play before people really think about trying to do a level 3 charger for a bus. That's too much. But
Is it the same, like, presumably you're gonna need them for school buses, like, is the
Right.
public transit
Next
charger the same charger as the school bus charger?
School buses, just to give you perspective, last year I bought a brand new school bus. I bought a gasoline school bus because up until then we were all, just not to get off the cuff, we were all diesel. Well, 2 years ago, gasoline's going to be the cleanest thing to do. That was the push. We're going to go gasoline. So I go out and I bought a brand new gasoline school bus. It was $118,000. Fine. 7 months later, we're not going to build gasoline school buses anymore. Now we're going to go electric. Electric school bus is $425,000 to run. It will cost me minimum of $25,000 for one charging system just to buy it. And that's not counting bringing in the infrastructure into my building or to put that charger. I have 60 buses. Scottsdale's just got $4.29 million grant for electric school buses. They're going to put in their budget. They're going to be voted on it. They have to spend $929,000 on infrastructure for charging stations, but they got to bring $10 million over into their general fund because they don't know how much the rest of it's going to cost going forward.
so yes, Michael, I do think we should keep it all. I don't know that it should be tied together, but it should be discussed together. Like I say,
If you're going to stay in it, you got to discuss it.
county's going to be one thing, but the busing it's separate. But I think while we're talking to National Grid and looking at infrastructure, we need to talk about that.
Right. So, well, it seems like either we need to partner with our provider to have those charging stations at their depot, or we need to start keeping the buses at our own depot with charging stations, right?
Right.
Like in the next 10 years, like that's one of those two options is going to happen.
Right.
Right now, we keep all but one at the county garage. The reason I keep one in Philmont is we usually swap them out because when we bring one to Philmont, we usually maintain it, service or whatever. But we always leave one in Philmont because we start the Monday route in Philmont, the Wednesday route in Copic. It always starts in Philmont garage and saves mileage and stuff like that. So it makes sense that way. So that's why we always keep one in Philmont. And if a bus breaks down in Albany, whatever, the guy runs out and grabs that bus and he goes.
So that would be the thing is like, could we add charging stations to the county, county garage?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's gonna take a long time.
It's not going to happen overnight. And again, I mean, I can foresee us in, a fairly short time being able to have some level 2 chargers at one of our facilities where we have some, rental vehicles, company lease cars.
Right.
And then again, you have to watch that. I mean, some of those vehicles get more mileage than an EV can do,
And that's the other thing I was just going to say. Right now, the technology that I'm aware of, comparable with the school bus, they won't work because you can't do the Albany run. In order to do the Albany run, go up and come back, you won't put it on charge. It won't be enough time to charge it for the afternoon run.
Right.
So now you have to have 4 buses to do the Albany run. You can do probably the shuttle.
Or you need a $250,000 charger.
Yeah, yeah. And then then they're talking, and the information I'm finding out, if you boost the charge, you cut down on the life of the batteries.
Right.
So
They're
some
not
of,
cheap to replace.
I mean, some of this is like,
At this point.
is a 10, 15-year plan, right? So we have some time, but I guess it makes sense to start moving with it.
Albany continues to go.
No, I was just gonna say, can we try to keep our fleet going for the next couple of years with combustion?
Well,
instead of
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
And that's
why I'm saying get ahead of it by buying as many as we can.
That's why, that's exactly what I was trying to get at without saying it. If unless you want to get into that right now, you need to buy these buses as soon as possible.
And that's exactly what I'm thinking as well.
I don't care how
Buy a
you
couple
do
of them
it.
before, while we
You
can't
need to
get them,
do it.
you know.
Park them in the garage or something. Otherwise, you're gonna be in trouble. I just bought 15 used buses and they're sitting in my backyard. The same reason.
So you can stay in business for
That's for a while. How am I gonna do? What else are we gonna do?
So we'll move ahead with purchasing Lot J. We wouldn't do a resolution until we're closer to contract.
Yeah, we shouldn't do it until we have like a solid price point. We know exactly what we're going to do, because in conjunction with the purchasing resolution, we should also be doing the retirement within that same resolution. So yes, I would think that we need to reach out to get the quote to purchase, as well as reach out about the retirement and do everything in one go, and probably not move forward with a resolution or anything like that until we have sure answers.
Okay, and then we'll continue the conversation around electric fleet.
Yeah, we do need to continue that.
Is that part of your long-term transportation?
It's
plan?
mentioned. I think we'll probably get into it a little bit more. Yeah.
We've been trying to gather some information and haven't been too successful, but
But I think it's got to be that within 5 years we'll have a plan that's
Right.
more
I will,
more clear.
I have a gentleman that works for me now, retired, works for me, Richard Debrock. And he's doing a lot of work for me on electric buses and stuff like that. And I will have him start gathering as much information
That'd be great.
on this stuff, for us.
but we have to look at his infrastructure.
Yes.
You
Right,
know,
and, but along the way, we gather information as we're doing school buses. We can grab other information regarding this, and I will have him. So
My
bring
message
it
is
to
just going to be, it's going to be a little bit like solar fields, is once you start to see, once these schools try it a little bit and they realize that it's not happening the way they want, there'll be some
some other
changes.
alternatives.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one more question that I can throw out at this. I know I'm just a ray of sunshine today. One other question, it's not really my business, but I'm going to throw it at you. With everything you're discussing here, unfortunately, and everything that's going up in price and everything, is it time that you discuss the possibility of raising your rate? Ridership rate?
I don't know if
Have you looked around the other counties?
we haven't. I guess
I think.
I don't know how much I don't know how much revenue it produced versus
Even if you raise it $1.
on riders.
You've been at $1
You make like
for,
30 grand a year on ridership, I think.
so if you raise it $1, you make 60.
I guess I've seen some arguments about doing the inverse.
I've
That
seen the
in
same
Albany and
thing. It's
Kingston,
way
they
less.
just do free rides because the state gives you $1 for every person who rides, right? So like, there's some calculation that if you don't charge at all, you actually might get as much revenue. Like if we charge nothing and ridership doubled, we would break even. So the question is like, I mean, I don't know what would happen if you raise it by $1, but
So you're saying if the county doesn't charge anything, you can get the money from the state then?
state pays us per
They
rider.
pay us per rider, so if we could, assuming the $1.50 is holding people back, we waive the fees, and now we have more riders. We get
I didn't
more
know that.
reimbursement.
Okay. Well, I'm for getting more money in any way you can then.
Then you have to collect the money.
Yeah.
I'm for that too,
Well,
because that can be a big revenue. Maybe that would increase some ridership.
Right. So like that,
If
I
you
think
advertise
it
it.
might be interesting to try, but I know that Albany and Kingston I haven't seen their stats, but they stopped charging in some routes with the idea that like numbers wise, the state gives you $1 per person who rides. Yeah.
Taxpayers just split the bill for all of it.
Well, that's a very interesting way, from my standpoint as a businessman. I mean, I'm all for trying to increase revenue, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah.
From the county standpoint and the dual hat as a taxpayer. And my thought is you pay at $1 for a century. And at one point in time, Ulster County was $3.
Mhm.
So that's why I'm asking
Yeah.
the question. But if I didn't know this concept, and maybe this is something to think about.
You could do a trial period,
Right.
you know, like the sales tax thing, where there's no sales tax up for a certain.
For a
period.
month, see what happens.
Anything to increase ridership will be absolutely a tremendous push if the county can get funds back for it.
And we gotta make a bus, you know. Well,
We gotta go there.
Really, you know?
We'll put a trailer on.
Okay, all right.
That's all I have.
I don't know. What do y'all think?
One other question, and I don't know if we complicate the whole thing, but I mean, is there a thought between us, should we have Marissa try and find out what a bus would cost outside of the program and have the county consider funding one?
So I have been talking to Don Brown, like they sent me their list of buses that are currently on the lot and things like that. No, I don't know that much. Aside from like what purchasing from state, truly,
Right, yeah.
I know about purchasing off state contract, what comes included with those buses. I know less about something that is used, and then the cost in, if necessary, upgrading it to like an ADA package to
Yep.
meet or things like that. But I can certainly, and I'm sure you're actually probably
I can
getting the same exact list
can
as
help.
I am too.
I think-
But yeah, we can continue to look at that.
Sure.
If we looked at what I mean, if we buy another smaller one or something outside of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do actually DOT contract and just
Yeah.
consider
Even
funding it, you know.
if you wanted to give me some pointers as to like
Sure,
what
I can help you
exactly
with
I
that.
can
And
look at.
I can give you
familiar
some
with.
other vendors to call too.
Yeah.
Because there are such in fact, the veterans, they found one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. In Indiana.
Yeah.
You know, and as long as there's certain things to it, you don't have to buy from Don Brown's.
Yeah,
There's
I know.
other avenues that I can get
I
information.
know.
But if it saves $100,000 and it comes in twice as quick, well,
Yeah.
Right. And I guess it's like we're heading towards a pain, like probably in 23 or 24, we're going to struggle with the fleet.
Yes.
So it makes sense that if we find the right bus over the next year,
Right.
I guess why not
something
just
to
go
start
do it?
talking about, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe we ask Matt to consider it in the ARPA fund or something, I don't know.
Oh, you got a list.
I know. There's things that we earmark and we're not gonna be able to do, so.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
You know,
Actually, we're gonna be
Yeah.
maybe proposing some other things.
I know.
It's all money out.
Right.
Always is. Always is.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Thank you, everyone.
I'll make it.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? All opposed? All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.